Tourette's podcast is not a medical advice show. It's a show about experiences. In the course of that, we may talk about medications or therapies or stories from the doctor's office, but don't mistake any of that for medical advice or direction. It's not. Get that only from people or places licensed or certified to give it, not from a massively fun and action-packed podcast about our life experiences. Such as?
I think at some point this year, we've all said, you've got to be kidding me. And we can't always control, especially those of us that have Tourette, we get this better than anybody. That's a privilege that we have, that we know that you can't control everything.
This is Tourette's podcast, made possible with support of the Tourette Association of America and part of the Geeks Rising Network. Hey everybody, it's Ben. My voice is getting a little better, I think. My doctor adjusted my asthma medication to something a little bit less abrasive. So far, so good, I think. Anyway, special episode, very special episode, because Jamie Grace, the award-winning and Grammy-nominated recording artist that so many of you have asked me to get on the show, is on the show with us today. Pure fun to talk to, and you'll hear what I mean. She's really clever, really insightful, and she has a book out now that walks us through what she's come to learn about getting through all this noise and turbulence and pressure and things that without a doubt you go through. Jamie has Tourette Syndrome, anxiety, OCD, things that put a unique angle on the difficult stuff that everybody experiences, with advice on how to get through it. Solid conversation, and that's coming up. Got a question here from a listener, a good question, from a listener named Aaron, Aaron, who says, "Hi Ben, I was listening to your episode with Adam Curry and agreed with him about how it's okay sometimes to give yourself and the people around you license to laugh about your Tourette's. But I also feel like that's an unpopular opinion, and I admit I don't know how to do that myself. What do you think is the right way to laugh about Tourette syndrome?" And that's a question from Aaron. Fantastic question, actually, and I think we'll get a variety of answers from the TS community, and I hope we do. Everyone, let me know what you think about that. What's the right way to laugh about Tourette syndrome with other people who don't have it? Tourette'sPodcast@gmail.com or use the contact link at Tourette'sPodcast.com. Personally, I think it's got to be an individual call totally based on the context of the situation and what you are comfortable with, as applied only to yourself and without it being a rule for other people with TS. Like what's okay for me won't be okay for you, potentially. Obviously, a comedian on stage hammering out Tourette's jokes with no redeeming quality and no frame of reference is just no good. And as I always say, it's the joke that's there for comedians who struggle to come up with original or thoughtful material anyway. And because it's a disorder that affects kids in a really deep and lifelong way, I mean, come on, Mr. Adult on stage making fun of it, please try something else. You don't know what you're doing. There's the pledge that goes around online where you can pledge to never make Tourette a punchline. That's a bit different than what I think Adam Curry was talking about how it's kind of sad if you can't find a way to laugh about the hard things in your life or what you're going through in the presence of friends or people around you. I guess one way to look at it is friends are there to get one another through life. You gravitate toward the people who appeal to you, and if you have those rare things in common, you click, and you want to protect that by looking out for one another. Sometimes life is like a Bartles and James commercial, and sometimes it's unfathomably hard. And in between, you just hope that you keep that rhythm of positivity that can be, pretty difficult to accomplish alone. So what I think Adam was talking about was, between friends, and maybe even a bit beyond there, you manage all this by finding things to laugh at. And that can be self-deprecation, and that can be, ribbing each other. So my closest friend, Gordy, we make fun of each other and talk trash to each other all the time. Because, in that context, it's just an alternate language, I guess, or a different way of conveying admiration. Gordy is a writer for a living, really talented, and occasionally he sends me something he wrote before it gets published. And I'll read through it, and it's fantastic, and I'll tell him, "Yeah, man, just got done reading it. Total garbage, man. Thanks for wasting my time once again." Or something like that. And the translation is, "Dude, you're amazing. This is fantastic. Congratulations on writing something that everybody's going to love." We do that all the time. I'm totally okay with a clever Tourette joke that isn't mean-spirited in my adult life. I don't think it's a good idea to make fun of kids, or if the sense of sarcasm isn't quite so developed, maybe not a good idea in general. But I do think just overall, when friends, rib one another and kind of playfully poke fun at each other, it's rewarding and you grow closer. And with laughing about Tourette syndrome, it doesn't have to be mean-spirited. And if there is something that strikes a negative chord with you in the context of someone who knows the score and doesn't mean any offense, you can use your words and set boundaries. But I agree that, there is a way to do it. You just have to figure out in the context of your life who has that license and who doesn't. Someone I've just met who picks up on my ticking and tries to imitate it in some cheap way does not have that license. But I think the bottom line is that the objection over the joke is when it doesn't serve any purpose but to make fun of someone's hardship. When the person making the joke doesn't have that frame of reference or understanding of who it affects. Exceptions to every rule, but that's how I personally feel about it, and I'm fine with certain people in my life making a joke about my winking or whatever it is. But I want to hear what you guys think. It's safe to say whatever you want because we're not establishing any rules. You may disagree with everything I just said, and that's totally fine because what I just said applies to me only. Your life is your life, which I think means, let's respect the personal boundaries that other people set. A laugh between my friends and I is harmless in that context because that's how I interpret it. And I'll push back on them and say something that makes fun of them too. I think you know what I mean. tourettespodcast@gmail.com. What are your thoughts on this? What do you prefer? Because I do think it's important for the outside world, so to speak, to kind of hear this, that it is going to be different for everybody. And maybe you can exercise some caution in getting to know somebody and figuring out what they're comfortable with. Thanks, Aaron, for your question. If you're not a member of the Tourette's Podcast discussion group on Facebook, join up. That's where you will find hundreds and hundreds of members who talk about all things Tourette, questions, answers, observations. There's one post on there right now I want to highlight from a member named Rachel. Rachel says, quote, "As part of an assignment of mine for one of my classes, I'm compiling a list of misconceptions about Tourette Syndrome and tic disorders. And I would love to hear what misconceptions about TS you all see or have experiences with to add to those I've experienced." End quote. That's from Rachel. Lots of comments on that post. Head to the discussion group on Facebook and weigh in. Thanks as always to the amazing Sophia for being the best admin we could ever want. Join the Tourette's Podcast discussion group on Facebook and give Sophia a thank you for the work she does there to keep it all together. All right, so I think my voice is starting to fade a bit. But real quick, and this is actually big news, coming up right on October 29th, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, is the Tourette Association's virtual gala. So pumped on this. I got some new details. I've been saying in the past weeks that I will be your MC, and we've got some well-known people taking part in it. Richard Dreyfuss, John Lithgow. I saw some communications confirming Billie Eilish, along with Dash Myhawk, Michael Wolff, David Begnaud, and more. There's a really great online auction. This is something you definitely want to check out. Just to name a few, a Phil Simms autographed New York Giants helmet, a trip to Italy on the Amalfi Coast, amazing, a trip to Ireland, a trip to Iceland, a boxing glove autographed by Sugar Ray Leonard. There's so much stuff here up for auction, from things with starting bids around $40 to lots of big ticket items. Go to tourette.org/gala to find the auction button and check all this stuff out. Trips to countries around the world beyond the ones I've just named, a Sammy Sosa autographed baseball, tons of stuff here. This is all to raise funds for the Tourette Association so they can continue doing what they do for the community. Of course, they are the primary sponsor of Tourette's Podcast, tourette.org/gala. Join me on October 29th, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the 2020 virtual gala, celebrities, performances, and me trying not to look like a nervous, greasy hipster as your MC for the night. It'll be fun. And speaking of fun, let's get to our conversation this week with Jamie Grace, a 2-time Grammy-nominated singer, songwriter, and actress who has Tourette Syndrome, OCD, ADHD, anxiety, all the stuff you can relate to. She's host of the Jamie Grace Podcast. Here's my talk with Jamie Grace. State your name and the general part of the world you live in.
Yeah, I'm Jamie Grace, and I live in Arizona.
And obviously that was a bit of a formality. I always start off episodes that way, but you don't need too much of an introduction. I mean, you're a recording artist. You've had a Grammy nomination twice, I think. You've won other awards. People know you, and it's safe to say that your audience overlaps with the listenership here pretty heavily for obvious reasons. Yeah. And this is to say, there's a lot of interest points that we could start with in talking about your life and where you are with it. But, you've got a book out now, and that's a really good way for us to cover these things with some structure. So I'd love to ask you some questions about it. And I think along the way, we're probably just going to naturally cover the kinds of things that I would ask about, even if you didn't have a book out. So
yeah, for sure. Well, I want to just be like super rude and just cut you off. Dude, I just
Anytime.
want to say thank you so much for having me on the podcast. Like right before we were recording, I was like, I didn't say this because I wanted to wait to save it for the actual show.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful to be on the show.
Oh,
I've,
cool.
it's been so awesome and cool to get to do all these different podcasts and shows about, as the book is coming out and talking about it. But there is I always it's actually pretty rare that I actually do things very specifically Tourette oriented,
Hmm.
and to just be in a safe space of not have to, no offense to anyone else, but just the definition's already out there, or
Yeah.
people it's just cool. And so I've been looking forward to this interview since, I don't know, we started tweeting each other years ago about doing this. And so
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm really happy this is happening.
Yeah, no, I'm excited, and you're exactly right. It's yeah, I don't have to, could you explain to us what Tourette syndrome is? I mean, we're there.
Yeah,
That's in
yeah,
the
yeah.
background, and we can just kind of talk naturally, and and I think the relatability here is going to be pretty huge because starting with the title of the book, it's called Finding Quiet. That's universally relatable right now, no matter who's listening. But what about that is unique to you? Like, what do you mean by finding quiet?
Right. Yeah. It's kind of like a multi-layered thing. I struggle with stuff that just has one meaning. I'm like, but what about the analogies? So, the initial concept of finding quiet, I am at my core, I'm very literal. And so I just kind of put it in the context of when I'm stressed out and when I'm overwhelmed, I need to learn how to take that 30 seconds of just quiet time, 60 seconds of quiet time. I'm a
Hmm.
mom. And so that's something that I'm trying to teach my daughter is it's not always about hey, you don't have to go take a full on nap, but you need to sit down for a little bit and rest because you're going to wear your body out if you don't take a little bit of quiet time.
Yeah.
So it's definitely applicable in the very literal sense of things, but then also just considering the world that we live in, and then especially for those of us that are neurodiverse, it's about we can't always shut down the noise around us. We can't
Hmm.
always get everything else to be quiet. I mean, a lot of us, if we, have vocal tics, we literally can't find quiet. So that's not an option for all of us, but it's how am I choosing to have peace and quiet in the midst of what's going on? And
Yeah.
how am I choosing to say no to adding to not adding unnecessary noise to the conversation? How am I choosing to choose peace instead of anger, to choose joy instead of frustration? And it's not that
Hmm.
it's bad necessarily to feel anger or frustration, but there are times where we can choose much more positive things and positive choices. And so that's honestly what this book is about. It goes through some of the literal action steps of talking about finding literal quiet, but also just about when we can't find quiet, then how do we still move on from that point as well?
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned kind of the different interpretations of the word quiet and kind of what it means or what noise means to us. And I'm 40, and kind of growing up, and I guess getting into the workforce and everything. There's the self consciousness that people like us tend to have, but also finding quiet kind of means, and I'm still working on this. Like I have to remind myself all the time to just take a basic break. Even just
Hmm.
beyond the noise I feel in my head every day, just take a basic break from what I'm doing, because I feel like it's been kind of stigmatized in the past, where it's almost like you have to justify why you're taking a little bit of time off
Right,
versus the practical benefits of being. There's a lot going on right now, and
right,
I need to kind of hang out with myself for a minute and stop
right.
thinking about these things that are pressuring me.
Yeah.
And it's that, and then there's obviously the other ways you described it, that the neurodivergent brain is, it's always kind of knocking on your own door. And
Right, right. I absolutely love the normalization of the phrase mental health day. I
yeah.
really do. I love that that's becoming very normal. And but I will also say that my parents, though they are always eager to learn and grow, that was not a part of their everyday vocabulary when I was growing up. But
Hmm.
what was a part of our everyday was my mom being like, you need a break, or if I was just because I remember actually times even if I was getting lectured on something, I remember my mom actually being like, I can't talk to you when you're like this. Go sit on the porch for like 5 minutes and just go breathe, And like now people would be like, oh, that was like a mental health exercise or, and that's great that it has like an official phrase and stuff like that. There's nothing wrong with that. But like we were saying, like a lot of times for us, I mean, I know you said you're 40. I'm 28. I feel like we're the same age.
Mhm.
We're
Yeah.
basically there. We're all grown-ups here. I'm just kidding. But yeah, it's like we maybe don't have the exact language and terminology for it, but sometimes it's just like I put this little silly thing on Instagram today. Sometimes it's just opening up the blinds, like not even opening up the window, but literally
Mhm.
just opening up the blinds and letting a little sunlight in. Even if we don't have the exact phrases and terminology for it, it's like even those seemingly small actions can help us find that peace and that center in our own very, very, very busy minds.
It's kind of funny because I have a dog. She's 12 years old. She's been with me, from since the start of her life.
Oh,
Early this year, right before the quarantine started, I got a cat from the shelter, and then eventually got another cat, which is a long story. But I feel like I'm kind of learning this from them in a way. And when you said open up the blinds, it's almost like it's something for them, and they see the light hitting that part of the carpet. It kind of heats it up, and then they just plonk themselves down there.
yeah.
And it creates this vibe for me where
Mm,
it feels more quiet. It feels more serene.
yeah.
It's in my home office and I'm doing my work and I'm doing all the frantic stuff that comes along with that. But just kind of having that as it's almost like like a living Post-it note.
It feels like it might not be that big of a deal, but like, dude,
Mhm.
it's amazing what we can learn from children and pets.
Yeah.
Like, they are some of the simplest and most complex, um, I was about to say humans, but animals are well, I mean,
No,
we
we
can
relate. Yeah.
yeah, we can learn so much. Like like my 1.5-year-old, dude, I'm telling you, if you open a blind near her, she will spin around and run to that window like you've just given her $1,000,000 because it's a change of scenery, it's a change of pace, and it's different and it's new. And so I try to do the same thing. I'm like, okay, let me just get up and get a glass of water. Like, go step outside, open the blinds, turn on the
Mhm.
light, blink a couple of times. Like, just it seems like it's small, but it really it can be a big deal.
Yeah, even just breathing in a different way,
Yeah.
it's just
Mhm.
little things like that. So when did you first meet up, so to speak, with Tourette syndrome? And I think you also have OCD and anxiety diagnoses. And
Yeah,
what's the
yeah.
quick backstory on you kind of learning that you had something different going on?
Yeah, so, I was 9 when my tick started. I mean, it kind of seemingly came out of nowhere. We're still not fully sure how
Hmm.
all of that happened, so I started with just like arm, leg ticks, neck stuff, and a lot of blinking and everything. And then eventually, like at first I thought it was just like a bad habit that I picked up because I've just always been like super quirky and weird. And, I was like, I was like, oh, I started doing this thing. I have to stop, but I couldn't stop it. So I told my parents, and then honestly, that was the start of a 2-year journey of
Hmm.
of my diagnosis and trying to find out what was going on. And so I was diagnosed at 11, and then, with Tourette syndrome, OCD, ADHD, and anxiety. And the primary things that we focused on for me growing up were Tourette syndrome and OCD because my
Hmm.
tics were so out of control that we really didn't have the energy to focus on anything else. Um, Looking back, I I didn't have I didn't have a great neurologist until I was 11. Like, for those 2 years, it was just not a great experience with the doctor I was working with. And I now see as I get older that, at least from my personal experience, like, treating my anxiety has been the best part of it, like the best, option for
Yeah.
me, because, like, my tics are just like, I can kind of start to get used to them. My OCD, I kinda work it to my advantage. My ADHD, I'm like, I'm loud. So, like, obviously, that's just very much everything in a nutshell. There's so much more to it than me just being loud. But before we really knew the extent of my anxiety, we were really just focusing on the Tourette because my tics were the most out of control and my OCD was the most, debilitating. So that's kind of
Hmm.
when everything started, was like 11, and then things kind of, uh, slowed down, or at least kind of I found my rhythm, I would say around 17 or 18 years old, which is, when I was, like, in college. So
So what's the overlap with, and I ask this feeling like you're going to get it because a lot of people with TS say this kind of thing who have a musical background or some kind of artistic background. Where does music overlap with you and kind of getting maybe a bit of a break from anxiety and ticking? And because I know for me, when I kind of slip into these creative modes, especially with music, and I'm really feeling it, I'm either not paying attention to my own ticking or I'm not doing it. It just there's something
Right,
about it
right.
that just kind of satisfies me.
Yeah, for sure. It's so many different things in such a positive way. Like what you were just saying, sometimes I don't notice my ticks. Sometimes they just go away because my mind is focusing on something else and I'm just kind of, I guess, using up all the energy that I have.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just, like anxiety presents itself in so many different ways. And one of the most prevalent ways that it presents itself with me is just like this need um, to do
Hmm.
something, to fix something, to cure something, to control something. And
Always.
so,
Yeah.
yeah, and so creating, it's like I'm fully in control to an extent, right? So like if I have my guitar, it's like, oh, I know what happens here. Like
Hmm.
I know exactly, like no matter how many years I've had Tourette syndrome, there will always be a random Thursday where some random tick just shows up and I'm like, super cool. We're throwing spoons now. Like,
Nice. Yeah.
okay. But like with my guitar, it's like, no, I can't create a new chord. I'm not Jacob Collier. Like I know this rhythm, I know this pace, I know what to do. And if I don't know what to do, then someone does, and an easy YouTube video, I can learn how to produce this song in this way or whatever. So that's a lot of it for me too. Is like it relieves that anxiety and it relieves that kind of gives me a place to redirect that need to do, that need to fix. Also with my ADHD, I mean, it's just kind of like a lot of people that have ADHD, like I can't help but notice literally everything that's happening in a room.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
also with OCD, it's almost like I have to know everything that's happening in a room. So having, you know, I I can't I know that in the practical part of my mind that I can't always know everything that's happening in every conversation, and when I hear a sound, I can't always know exactly where it came from and which degree of my left eye I can see it out of, like, I know that I can't do that. So, creating gives me that space to do all of those things that I know in the literal world, I won't be able to do. So yeah, so I always feel bad, like, when I'm in spaces, especially when it's predominantly, like, neurotypical spaces, and they're like, "So what are some of your hobbies?" And I'm like, anything that keeps me busy.
Yeah.
Then
Yeah.
I start to feel like a jerk because 'cause I'm like, "That's not a hobby." So I'm like, "Okay," like, and I get the question, like, "Besides music, what are some of your hobbies?" I'm like, "No, no, 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 no. Can we go back? Can we go back? Can we talk about the thing that I really like because I like that?"
Well, does ticking ever interfere with your ability to perform, or has it ever happened?
Um, yeah, definitely, that I mean, that's kind of I feel like part of the drama of it all. It's like even though I get into these modes where I feel like I've kinda got it under control, at the end of the day, like, my brain is not precisely like someone else's.
Hmm.
And so there are still times where, things aren't great, especially and even in, the professional sense. I feel like when it comes to my mental health, the main thing that happens is just, like I shouldn't say just, but the main thing that happens is the overload of things in my brain can kind of cause me to shut down.
Hmm.
It almost feels like if I don't do enough when I need to do, then I kind of miss the opportunity, if that makes sense. Like,
That definitely makes sense.
yeah, it's like my brain is just like running, 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 running. And if I don't just go and like write it out or journal or exercise or whatever, it's almost just like my brain is like, "Well, we'll try again next week." So that stinks for sure.
Hmm.
And I mean, I'm not gonna lie, like I have a podcast, and sometimes I just don't upload an episode because I just can't do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then there's been a few times where my ticks have shown up, like during a show or like while I was, doing a speaking engagement or something. And I mean, I trust what people say when I'm about to sound like really I don't want to sound jaded, but it might come out a
Hmm.
little jaded. But people will say like, it was just so much more like powerful because we really got to see what you mean by being out of control. not like out of
Mm,
control, but just not having control.
right.
And I respect that. I mean, I'm a person of faith, and so I do believe that God is able to take some of the worst situations and still inspire people and still bless people, and I'm obviously grateful for that, but it doesn't
Mhm.
mean that it doesn't stink, you know? It doesn't mean that it doesn't affect your ego or your confidence a little bit when you feel like, "Oh, I'm having a good day. I've got my Tourette under control," or, "Oh, I'm on an Instagram live. I'm doing a thing," and then you kind of feel like your Tourette stole the show. So
Yeah.
that's a little irritating.
But it's funny 'cause I definitely relate to what you said about kind of, like that moment when you have like a structure in your brain or like a chord progression or something. You want to do something with this thing that's kind of pulling you. And if you don't, that, that window kind of goes away or that window closes. But at the same time, sometimes when you do seize that opportunity, at least with me, all of a sudden these other things start
Right.
showing up in front of me. They're like, hey, but
Uh,
do this first or do
right,
this first.
right.
Then it just kind of pulls you apart.
Yeah, I have a dry erase board in my office that sometimes is, I would say 80% of the time, it is so helpful because I kinda get there, like what you're saying, and so I'll go and just write down all the stuff that's happening in my head,
Hmm.
um, just so I can try to stay on target and on task, but that other 20%, that dry erase board gets so full, there's no space to put anything else, and I'm
Yeah.
like, "Oh, man, this is where I actually gotta do the stuff I wrote down." Like,
Yeah.
that's no fun. I wanted to write down all the stuff I wanna do and come up with all the ideas. I didn't wanna have to complete all the tasks. And some of that's, being divergent, some of that's or neurodiverse, forgive me for being grammatically, incorrect, but some of that's also just my personality, and sometimes that's just a millennial being lazy, so it
Hmm.
kinda depends. I gotta try to, like, be honest with myself and be like, "Okay, is this because you have ADHD, or is this because you don't wanna do paperwork and you just wanna sing songs?" So I have to try to be honest with myself, and yeah, it's hard, man. Life is hard. Growing up is
Yeah.
hard.
Hey guys, we'll get back to the conversation in just a minute, but real quick, I want to invite you guys to a big event I'll be emceeing on October 29th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can sit wherever you want, you can wear whatever you want. It's the virtual gala with the Tourette Association of America. They asked me to MC this, and I'm pumped. It's a big fundraiser for the Tourette Association so they can continue their work for the community. Science, research, awareness, education, sponsoring Tourette's podcast, all kinds of resources that are freely available to you that can make a big difference in your life. I'll be joined by a number of special guests, including the Mazzarisi brothers, Caden and Jace, young men I got to talk to over Zoom just recently, and they told me how having Tourette actually makes them popular at school. For real, that's what they said, because it's a rare thing to have, but still, millions and millions of people have it, so they've got a posse. Caden and Jace are on deck to open up the gala. And by the way, they're also spokesmen for Tourette's podcast. Do you guys want to tell everybody to listen to Tourette's podcast so they understand what you go through and so they understand more about Tourette syndrome? You could tell all your friends right now to listen to Tourette's podcast.
Go look at Tourette's podcast to see our life. Yeah. So make sure to do that, and we will see you back at the 2020 Virtual Gala.
The virtual gala, October 29th, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Tourette.org/gala. Okay, back to the conversation. You were 19, right, when you got your first Grammy nomination?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
what I'm about to say here is nothing you don't already know, but it's pretty young to be under the spotlight and the pressure, and I'm not sure how I would handle that kind of thing, even if it's favorable toward me. Not to mention the
Mhm.
diagnoses I have that really, there's that harsh, like nervous edge that comes with Tourette and the anxiety piece and so on. How did that impact you and all that pressure and attention and noise
Yeah.
at the age of 19?
Dude, first of all, I just wanna tell you that when you started out talking and you were saying, like, when I was 19, I don't know what was happening in my brain. I think I thought I was 19 right now, and I was about to be
Hmm.
like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." Anyways, I'm almost 30. But yeah, that happened when I was 19, and, it was pretty crazy. I recently watched the, music video, "Lonely" by Justin Bieber, and, I don't know if you've seen that, but I think everybody
No, I
should go
haven't.
watch it. Depending on, lifestyle and choices and stuff like, it's a explicit song, I think, but it's contextual as he's sharing his story. And I just like to give those kinds of disclaimers because I know that,
Sure.
broad audiences and stuff. But it was one of the most relatable things I have seen in a long time. It's just he's talking about how he was just so lonely as a kid, just trying to be a star, if you will.
Hmm.
And I experienced fame on a much smaller scale than Justin Bieber did, but to be known in any capacity adds pressure. Whether you're the popular kid at school, you're an ambassador for a local brand or a local community, you are the star athlete, you're, famous for your music, your YouTube channel, your podcast. Being known in any capacity can always cause stress and loneliness. And I'm grateful that my launch into the industry, I was about 17 when my YouTube channel kind of took off, and I started doing a kids tour and a kids show, and there was fame associated with that, but not crazy like crazy big, but it was
Hmm.
enough to where like my mom had like went with me to my shows and stuff like that, and my launch into the industry was just full of joy, and I'm grateful for that kind of like pre-show to the whole Grammy situation that happened at 19 and everything. And it was hard because to be honest, I think the hardest part rather was not having a safe space. I mean, yes, it's hard to be known and like yes, it's hard when people are judging you and they have all these opinions about you. Like that's hard for sure.
Hmm.
Excuse me, but I think the hardest part was not having a real community around me to debrief and to process and to experience. As I got older, kind of as you would expect, my mom wasn't traveling with me as much. And she would have loved to, but like she wasn't seeing my dad at all. Like, they're like super happily married. So that was just not a great, dynamic situation. And also I was a grown up. So, like going off to college or whatever it might be, typically as you get older, you kind of start to do things for yourself and discover some independence. And that was really great. But I also just began to isolate. I wanted to do everything for myself. I wanted to prove that I didn't need help, that I didn't need support. I was traveling away from my college. And so I didn't have my weekly therapy that my university offered. Um, I was growing up and I was dealing with a lot of the stuff that you deal with when you grow up, but I was also dealing with some really random stuff that you deal with when you're in the public eye, like
Yeah.
being, 20, 21, and just I hadn't experienced anything like that. Like I remember one day, this is before like influencers, like that kind of culture was normal, right? So I remember like one day I'm like 20 or 21 years old and like I just tweeted something about like, oh, I love this like hair stuff. It really helps with the Georgia humidity. And
Hmm.
within 3 days, that company had sent us hundreds of dollars of shampoo and conditioner
Wow.
to our house. I don't know how they found my address to my house. And this is like almost 10 years ago.
Yeah.
It was to the point where like I'm walking around Target and like people hear my speaking voice and they're like, oh, you're that girl that was the youngest nominee at the Grammys. We saw you there. Like I made a list of like the worst dressed people at the Grammy Awards, which I thought was hilarious and really cool. And I was like pumped to have made a list.
Yeah.
I was like, yes, they saw me. Like, like I didn't care why. And so like this is happening to me. I'm a literal like teenager. This stuff is happening to me and I'm experiencing all that. But what I was missing was a safe space. And what I was
Yeah.
missing was a place to talk and a place to process and a place to help me understand what I was feeling and a place to validate those feelings because my job was nope, stay happy, stay energetic, keep this energy out there. And again, as a person of faith, I think that's a misconception as well, about being a Christian and about Christian culture is like, oh yeah, like, God is good. So smile and, pump your fist in the air and dance around all day. And like,
Right.
that's not at all like what the Bible talks about. Like, the Bible has like a bajillion people that are like living a hot mess kind of life that are like, Lord help me, And so I was missing a lot in life. And, when I was 24, I made a decision to become an independent artist and I walked away from the life I was living and I made that
Mm.
major change to find quiet and to find my safe space again and to get with a local therapist to help me walk through some of the trauma that I had experienced. And to see my neurologist again, help recenter and refocus. And I don't want to give the misconception that I walked away from any industry or that I walked away from music, because that's not what this is about. I'm
Hmm.
still full time in music, and I'm grateful that I have that privilege. But sometimes you have to take a look around you and say, okay, am I like, it doesn't matter how grown I am. Am I still calling my parents and letting them know how I'm doing? Do I have a friend that can call me if things seem rough or difficult, and I'm going to be honest with them no matter what? Am I still checking in with my therapist even if I feel like everything's going okay? Sometimes we have to kind of have that like tough love conversation with ourselves and be
Yeah.
like, okay, like, what am I doing to take care of myself? What am I doing to make sure that I'm being the best possible version of myself and being honest with myself when I might not be being the best possible version of myself?
That's massive, and just speaks to the wealth of just having friends, or just doing nothing for a day. So when you're in the public eye, I can see the conflict of being like, that am I going to let people down if I go away,
Right,
is this
right.
inspiring to certain people who are going to be let down if I kind of like pull back a bit, or so that had to be a lot to wrestle with, I imagine. But still, I mean that's just the way to say that having a phone call with your best friend, or just all these simple little things that are kind of really where it's at.
Right, right.
And also, just having a life to yourself and friends and relationships, that's tough enough, especially, with mental health considerations, and that goes for everybody. But what are your thoughts on having a misunderstood disorder or two or three, and the patience required for healthy relationships and friendships and significant others and so on? Because, plenty of people listening to this also talk about this kind of thing in the form of a question on, message groups and Tourette Facebook groups and things like that. Is that something you kind of tackle in your book? The processing of just kind of going back to a quote unquote normal life where you have your friends and you're balancing these things with the other pressures that are kind of coming at you.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, if I'm honest, I've had a little bit of practice since I was like a little kid with just being misunderstood.
Hmm.
And so, I was a homeschooler, so there's that. I'm also like, I'm a pastor's kid. And so there was that as well. I'm this black girl from Georgia that loves cowboy boots, but also Christian hip hop. So it's like,
Hmm.
what, what's going on here? Like, it's so at our at our wedding, like, I got married 2.5 years ago, and at our wedding, I think I had 17 bridesmaids, because I just couldn't decide. I was like,
Yeah.
they're all so nice. I was like, I can't decide. And so I was like, I'm just gonna have them all. So I'm kind of, like I've kind of got a little bit of practice when it comes to being misunderstood. And that's the first and foremost thing, is like, I'm okay with being misunderstood, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm okay with accepting that there is no such thing as normal. And that understanding and processing is my version of normal, even though to you it's completely different. And so, no, with that being said, just a little bit of context, like, of course, I believe that there in some structures, like, there is such thing as normal. I do like to use this very not so dignified kind of analogy, if you will, but I always talk about, like, there are some like beaches with like the ocean and the sand and the water and all these beautiful things where everybody, the standard is that you wear clothes. And then there are
Hmm.
some where the standard is that you do not wear clothes. Like,
Right.
maybe don't maybe like don't invite me to one of the ones where you don't wear clothes, because that's not my vibe. You know what I mean? And then maybe if I invite you to one of the ones where you do wear clothes, then maybe show up in clothes. So, like, depending on where you are, what's going on, like, there are different standards of normal. So I'm not just saying like, everybody wear your birthday suit to the mall, like, because there is such thing as normal in that context, and a few others as well. But when it comes to like, having a condition that's misunderstood and stuff like that, like, there are times where I do explain my Tourette, and I feel like it needs to be explained, or I just want to explain it, or because sometimes I don't fully want to, but somebody might want to understand. And if I see that they're being genuine and honest, I'm like, you know what? let me take a deep breath. I'm going to raise awareness today, even if
Hmm.
I feel
Yeah.
kind of tired. My dad's a pastor, like I mentioned. And so I worked with kids at our church for a long time. And so I learned how to, like, oh Lord, I learned how to do that. Okay. So, how when you tell your brain to move your arm, let's move our arms together. Cool. Well, I have these things called tics, and sometimes my brain tells my arm to move, and I didn't even tell it to. And they'll be
Right.
like, "What?" And I'm like, "I know, I can't help it." So like, of course, there are times where like I've learned how to tell what Tourette is to little children. I've learned how to tell what it is in so many different circles, but and then I have friends that know way more details about, all my tics. And then I have some friends that they feel like they've never seen me tick, even though I'm like ticking up a storm right in front of their face. I'm just so loud, they don't even notice. So it really does depend, to be honest. But the best thing that you can do is one, be comfortable in your skin. I believe that God loves each and every one of us and didn't make mistakes when he made us. And so be comfortable in the skin, even in your own skin, in the skin that you're in, even if you tick or you have vocal tics or like your OCD, it makes you feel different, your anxiety, depression, whatever that might be comfortable in your own skin first and foremost. And then two,
Mhm.
surround yourself with people that love you for who you are and you love them for who they are. Um, and you guys are just actively working on encouraging each other to just continue to grow and learn and be the best possible version of yourselves.
Mhm.
And then as it presents itself, when necessary, you might share about it a little bit more. And you might open up a little bit more. Like when you mentioned, like when I walked away and became an independent artist, and a lot of people were like, that doesn't make sense. Like that I don't understand what's going on. Like, I
Hmm.
mean, just to be
Yeah.
very frank, like there were legal conversations from walking away from certain relationships where we
Wow.
agreed on what kind of statements we would share publicly. And so I can't tell everybody all the details and all the information,
Mhm.
whether it's I'm talking about my medical situation or past work experiences or whatnot. And that's okay. Sometimes you're going to be different. Sometimes you're going to stand out. Sometimes you're going to be doing your thing. And everybody is not going to get a front row seat or a backstage pass to learn every single tiny detail. But if you're walking in the purpose that you've been created for, and if you are surrounded by people that are encouraging you to do the same and you're encouraging them to do the same, I mean, and I'm not talking 50, 60 people. Like you can have one or two really good people. Maybe two or three. It's a lot on one person if you just got one. So like
Mhm.
find a counselor, find a mentor, find a friend. You got two or three good people in your life. Just continue to live that life beautifully and live that life well, and know that sometimes we will be misunderstood, but that's okay.
Yeah, I like that because when you said, be comfortable in the skin that you're in, sometimes that's people perceive that as the goal they have to work toward instead of a step to take to get to
Right,
somewhere else.
right.
But I feel like what you just talked about is kind of the formula to get there and find a sense of contentment. I mean, do you
Right.
find that to be the case, or when it comes to like finding quiet? I mean, are there other sort of practical steps to because sometimes we feel overwhelmed and we don't even know why
Mhm.
life just kind of, anxiety hits. What seems to work for you when these things kind of come and you are feeling maybe in a sense of kind of crisis or urgency, or what tends to work for you?
Right, right. I try to be just really intentional with my time.
Hmm.
And I just try to make sure that I'm just being like a wise steward of like the time that I have, right? So like um I don't know, like I just sometimes I just try to go through like a little checklist in my mind of what I need. Like if
Yeah.
I'm feeling anxious, if I'm feeling frustrated, whether it's with, something I just saw on the news where I'm like, "You've got to be kidding me," It's like it's an election year. I think everybody has felt that at least once this year.
We all
Also,
relate. Yeah.
hashtag pandemic. There's a lot happening in 2020. So, I think at some point this year, we've all said, "You've got to be kidding me." And
Hmm.
we can't always control, especially those of us that have Tourette, we get this better than anybody. That's a privilege that we have, that
Yep.
we know that you can't control everything. And so I just kind of go through like a little checklist in my head. I know that it might sound really silly, but it's been very helpful for me. One of the first things I always ask myself is, do you have to pee? I know that's so random, but sometimes that really helps.
Yeah.
Sometimes it
Yeah.
doesn't, so I just move on to the next one. I'm like, "Do you need some water?" I love water. Sometimes I'm so thirsty and I don't realize it, and it's like because some of my basic human needs aren't being met, my anxiety is getting cranked up.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll ask myself, "Do you feel warm?" And I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I do. Let me fix the air, or let me take off this sweatshirt that I thought would be cute, but it's not really fall because hashtag global warming." Like, sometimes I'm like,
Yeah.
"Do you feel cold? Maybe I need a hoodie on. Are you hungry?" I try to go through, like, my basic human needs first, and kind of see, like, where can I go from here? Because I'm naturally, and maybe I'm not even naturally, maybe this is just a thing of like millennials and Gen Z or whatever. But sometimes, like, if I'm just starting to feel anxious out of nowhere, I'll be like, let me just get on TikTok and just swipe through for like half an hour and just find
Mhm.
something to make me laugh. Or if I can't fall asleep at night, I'm like, let me turn on a show, to help distract me or something. And as someone that has like anxiety and Tourette, like sometimes that's actually a coping mechanism. So I'm not saying that that's anything wrong, because there are plenty of times where TikTok will like come in and clutch and make me laugh at the right moment, and I'm very grateful for that. But sometimes I just have to make sure that I'm not ignoring my basic human needs. Um,
Right.
and because of the level of my anxiety, that is very easy for me to do. I'll forget to eat. I'll forget to drink water.
Oh, yeah.
Like
Mhm.
sometimes, like so I'll forget to wash my face sometimes, and not even like in a like I don't have like good hygiene, not like that, but like 'cause sometimes I just like want to go take care of myself. I'm like, I'm gonna go
Mhm.
brush my teeth. It's gonna make me feel so great. Or I'm gonna go get a face wash, like a little, disposable face wipe, and I'm gonna go sit on the front porch and just wipe my face off. I know it sounds so silly, but so often my basic human needs get overlooked because of my anxiety. And
Yeah.
so just going through a small little checklist of the things that I know I need to take care of can change my entire perspective.
Yeah, I think about that more and more about how sometimes we do if there is something that, a problem or something we're feeling, I think sometimes we do just want to think it's a pretty complex thing and who knows why I'm feeling this way. It's, there's no
Right,
answer
right.
to it, or it's a diagnosis or something like that. But just ticking off a few of the simple things, it can satisfy all these other things where there may indeed be a complex nature to what you're feeling. Some of
Mhm.
the simple things kind of knock down a lot of these mysteries, and you're on your way to
Right, right.
feeling better.
I mean, sometimes I'll go through that list and I'll be like, "No, I need my therapist." But,
Right.
like,
Mhm. Yeah.
other times I'm like, "Oh, I didn't eat breakfast."
Yeah.
It just
Yeah,
depends.
I totally do that where, it's just it's 9 p.m. and I'm like, "Why do I feel horrible?" I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I've been sitting at my computer since 8 a.m.
Yes.
I think I ate like a cracker this morning or something,"
Yes.
and that's not even an exaggeration. I mean, I have days like that where I'm like, "What am I doing?" And you can just run away with yourself, especially when you're meeting expectations, when you have a workload or a checklist or,
Right,
you know,
right.
it, it can just be a runaway. And I want to ask you too, you've used the word joy a few times during this
Yeah.
interview. What does that mean to you in terms of how you apply it to life as a concept? It's not always apparent, how to find it or how to experience it.
Right, right. I like to believe that joy, is ever present. It's oftentimes uh just a choice to accept it, but at the same time, I don't want to lose anybody there, and they're like, oh Lord, she just thinks I just gotta smile and I'll be fine. But also there are times where we need to feel that pain to get to that joy.
Mhm.
We need to grieve so that we can experience joy.
That contrast.
And yeah, and sometimes we're just running, running, running on joy, just running, running, running on fumes of happy, just, school every day, work every day, smiling everybody, doing our job, doing our thing, yada, yada, yada. And we are avoiding pain and grief and sadness that we
Hmm.
don't want to think about, we don't want to feel, we don't want to care about. We don't want to process, oftentimes because it hurts too much. But
Hmm.
sometimes we gotta let it hurt. I some friends of mine, their name is Johnny Swim. They're a husband and wife band, and they have this song called "Let It Matter," and it's one of my favorite songs. And I know I'm a musician; I should promote myself, whatever. So they're they have this song called "Let It Matter." It is so powerful, man. It literally is like the chorus says, "If it matters, let it matter."
Yeah.
And it came out a couple years ago.
Oh, that's great.
It was inspired after, Amanda, the wife in the duo, her mom passed away, It's just like, you don't have to always jump into the joy. So I think, joy is, like I said, joy is beautiful. It's ever present and it's there when we need it. But oftentimes we got to make sure that we go through the pain first to get there. I did some stuff with the Tourette Association earlier this year, and literally like 2 weeks before like quarantine kind of happened nationally. So I was really glad I got to be a part of that in person. They were the last people I saw. And so I did this event with them, and I was speaking and talking about how, as people with Tourette syndrome, we are fighting for our right to be loud. We are fighting for our right to be able to speak and to be able to tick and to be able to make all the noise that we want to, without this fear and this kind of worry that we might be being too loud. But the only reason, I think Tourette syndrome is such a beautiful analogy for life, because the only reason that any of us that tick, that make a sound, whether we have a vocal tick or one of our physical ticks just is that loud, any of us that makes a sound, it's because we found quiet. It's because at some point it was so quiet. Like, that's the only way that we know what sound is because we were quiet. And I think the only way that, when you're talking about wanting to write a song or, be creative or find your purpose, find your reason for being in this world, the only way you can find your voice is once you found enough quiet to sit with that and think through it and meditate on it and pray on it. In the same way that the only way that you can find your joy is if you've gone through that pain, you've gone through that grief. So, quiet is not a 24/7 till the end of time existence. It's a journey that we have to walk through, that we have to embrace, so that we can find our loud, and so that we can find our voice, and so that we can truly begin to embrace joy and what that means for us. And so, if you have Tourette, you already figured it out. Congratulations. Go us. We the best. Sorry, I got a little DJ Khaled in the end. Just ignore me.
But no, it is true. I mean, you can't see something unless there's a bit of contrast with it. And it has to have its identifying factors. And I kind of think about it like the ice cream headache. It's like you've got it and it's horrible. And then the second it goes away, you feel almost euphoric, even though you just kind of feel normal again.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
It's just, it feels so good in comparison to how bad it felt a second ago.
Right.
That it exaggerates how good feeling, quote unquote normal, I'm using that word, but how that can be. And you use the word privilege with Tourette earlier, and I think that's actually really, really accurate, because it does kind of unlock, you have a built-in lesson on empathy, and you have a built-in lesson on, understanding what's misunderstood in other people and giving them a chance to kind of be themselves without rushing to judgment of like, God, this guy's a weirdo. And it really is a nice thing to have. And I did not always think that way. It took me a long time to think that.
100%, again, like one of the misconceptions, like when I'm speaking, like, as a Christian, when I'm speaking in certain communities and stuff like that, like people often ask me like, how do I deal with that? Because something that if you're not super familiar with church or something like that, but something that people talk about a lot is like how, like, miracles and like how God does cool stuff like that. And I'm like, look, a lot of times the things we have to go through in life, like, we don't want to always go through them, but they're a part of our purpose. And like I don't think I'm just like the best of the best, because I'm definitely a hot mess a lot of times. But like, I would not be as compassionate as I am if I didn't have Tourette syndrome. Like, I'd be like, I'm already like kind of impatient, just like being a human. Like, I want my Netflix to download, and I want it to download now. But at the same time, it's like I have a level of compassion for people, and that is only developed through having something like Tourette syndrome. And so it teaches us so much. And I think that's a lot of the times why we go through struggles, is so that we can learn lessons and hopefully help other people.
Absolutely. And I hope people listening to this don't kind of misconstrue this as saying, that it's not difficult, because, there are some people who have really, really difficult, really impossible to manage cases. And, it can be really, some people have challenges and I don't know what the answer is. It can be a very, very difficult thing to have. But so I just want to make sure everybody understands that we're talking about the concept of kind of being there and understanding, what it can be like to have something that
Right.
people around you don't get, people around you don't understand, and the access that can give you to other emotions that people don't necessarily have built in.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we've covered a lot of stuff. This is great. I mean, where do you think this leaves us? What's the bottom line for you in life right now, or how you go about it, or what's this book gonna sort of answer for you right now, or what do you hope it conveys to people who read it?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, like what you just said is just so significant to me. I think making sure that we remember the complexities and the adversities that people do go through. And I hope that, like obviously I have Tourette and stuff, but like there are more, I would say, I don't know, probably more tick-free moments in my 20s. Well, let me rephrase. There are definitely less ticks in my 20s than like in my teen years. But I also know that like there are people that have never experienced having even a friendship with someone with a diagnosed, case of Tourette syndrome or anxiety or something like that. So I do hope at the bare minimum that this book can reach people that just want to know more and that just want to understand more about the condition and things like that. But for those that understand it, for those that live with it on a daily basis, I hope that it's a book of encouragement. I hope it's a book of hope. I hope that I hope people laugh a little bit because I'm just super awkward and weird. And like every time like I got to like a really emotional place in the book, I would just like start cracking jokes because I was like, oh, this is weird. Like I don't want people to like cry. That's just creepy.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I'm kind of looking for like a all the feels kind of vibe, But yeah, I just hope it can be encouraging to people. I definitely am not the only one out there that has a story to tell. And I hope that people reading this book will be inspired to share their stories as well, whether that means the local community or YouTube channels or writing a book or whatever that looks like, this podcast. I hope that it inspires people to say like, hey, I have Tourette syndrome too, but it's nothing like hers. I want to share my story. Or, like, hey, I actually, my brother has Tourette syndrome and I want to share this perspective. Like, I just really hope that it encourages people to live out their purpose and share their story. And, this is going to just sound like such like an optimist thing to say, but it'll inspire more people and it'll just keep inspiring people. Whoa, I sound like I'm like trying to prove that I'm like a motivational speaker.
No, I'm so happy you did this because, asking for help can be hard when you don't feel like people are going to get where you're coming from. And
right.
When there's a resource like this, a book, where the perspective includes something that you can directly relate to and, may even help you find new ways to explain it to other people. That's huge. That's really, really huge. Just learning how to convey it and connect with people so they understand where you're coming from. That's
right,
gigantic.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm going to just say, yeah, instead of like trying to add anymore.
Well, how do people get the book?
Yeah, so I love me some Amazon. I like that I can like watch on the little map when it's going to get to my house. And so I can be a creeper and sit by the door and be like, well, hello, sir. So if you want to get on Amazon, Jamie Grace, Finding Quiet, or if you really want a signed copy, you can go to jamiegrace.com. We are a smaller operation than Amazon, so it won't get to you as fast, but it'll be signed. So honestly, whichever one you like, you can find me on Instagram at JamieGraceH, and I literally post those links in my story like all day, in a non-spammy way. It's all like, oh, is this a promotion or is this like an inspiration? Is it both? Okay, I'm gonna hush now.
Well, Jamie Grace, thank you so much. This has been so much fun talking. I'm glad we finally got to it, and I'm excited about your book. So really, really appreciate this.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it as well.
Thanks for listening, Jamie. Thanks so much for giving your time here. That was really valuable. I thought it was really grounding. Please send your feedback, tourettespodcast@gmail.com. And check out Jamie's new book, Finding Quiet. Tourette's Podcast is sponsored by the Tourette Association of America, tourette.org/gala for information about the October 29th virtual gala. Don't leave me hanging. Please join me there. Check out the auction in the meantime. Massively jealous of the things on there that someone, maybe you, will be winning. Tourette's Podcast also gets support from listeners who can contribute at patreon.com/Tourette's Podcast, the latest being Carolyn, Thank you so much, Carolyn. If you contribute at Patreon, I give you an executive producer credit. So that now goes to Carolyn. Thank you so much for supporting the show. Patreon.com/Tourette's Podcast. Geeksrising.com is where you can find Tourette's Podcast and many other podcasts from thoughtful creators like Bandrew, Heather, Logan, Malcolm, and Zach, who are definitely like family by this point, and they do support the Tourette community, including some recent generous donations to the Tourette Association. That's awesome. The Geeks Rising Podcast Network, geeksrising.com. Tourette's Podcast at gmail.com is how you can get up with me and send your feedback, ideas, ways to improve the podcast. I'm always open to that. My voice is dying. At Tourette's Pod on Twitter, Tourette's Podcast on Instagram, and of course there's the Tourette's Podcast discussion group on Facebook with the amazing Sophia as our admin. Hope I'm not forgetting anything. Call me out if I am. I'll be back next week with another conversation, hopefully a better voice. Thanks for listening. This is Ben.